UFC Fight Night Vegas 68, Lewis versus Spivak takes place this weekend, and I'm going to go through the entire card, starting with the early prelims, ending with the main events, making my prediction and breakdown for every single fight on the card, and I can't wait for this one. It's absolutely stacked, top to bottom. What a blockbuster card this is. I can't wait to wake up at 3 a.m. UK time to watch the early prelim opener of this one. I can't wait to ruin my sleep schedule just for this card. But thank God it's so stacked, it's unbelievably amazing. Let's start straight away with the early prelim opener of Tatsuro Taira versus Jesus Aguilar. I am going to go with Tatsuro Taira. This isn't a bad fight. They aren't bad fights. Some of them are pretty good. But it's just there's no real, to the card. Tatsuro Taira versus Jesus Aguilar. I'm going to go with Tatsuro Taira. I believe in this guy. I think he's showing a lot of good promise. He's a very young fighter as well, so he's going to have a lot to improve on. 23 years of age, a big guy for the flyweight division as well. And I think he's just going to have an advantage in the size against Jesus Aguilar. And maybe Aguilar can scramble a little bit, but I do believe that Tatsuro Taira, in some grappling situations, is going to be able to get the back, keep positional control, and just start landing some ground and pound shots. Jesus Aguilar's not bad. He really isn't bad, but he ain't quite Tatsuro Taira, in my opinion. And I think Tatsuro Taira's going to even have a big advantage on the feet against this guy because he has a 7.5-inch reach advantage over him. So even if you do see Aguilar maybe scramble a little bit too heavily or threaten with some guillotines, because he does have a few guillotines in his career, even if you do see him threaten Taira in the grappling, I think Taira can really stay at range on the feet here and pick this guy apart. It's going to be dangerous, of course, but come on. At flyweight, a 7.5-inch reach advantage in the hands of a prospect like Tatsuro Taira, you know that's all they're going to be practicing for. You know what I mean? This guy's had a bunch of amateur experience, a bunch of pro experience. He's fought some experienced guys, and he's looked good all the way. Like, people are very hyped up on Muhammad Mokaev, but Taira's sort of done better work so far in his career, I would say. Because Mokaev's had a few fights in the recent two of them that haven't really looked too impressive, whereas Taira has been impressive the entire way through. So I believe in this guy, and I think he will beat Aguilar, and I think he'll just pick him apart at range and be able to secure dominant position on the ground and lead himself to a decision win. But I think Aguilar's going to be too tough to get finished in this fight. But Tatsuro Taira by decision. We move on. Up the card, Hyun Yong Park versus Denis Tiuliulin. I am going to go with Hyun Yong Park here over Denis Tiuliulin. It will be good battle, as Denis Tiuliulin would say. I just don't see Denis Tiuliulin having a chance to finish Hyun Yong Park early on. And although Denis Tiuliulin did break Jamie Pickett with his pace in his last fight, he didn't seem like... I don't know, he just didn't seem... He seemed exhausted himself trying to keep up with that pace. And if you're getting tired in a fight, I don't like that, because Hyun Yong Park can keep a really good pace over 3 rounds. And he's really started to sort of hone his skills recently. He had a great performance against Joseph Holmes in his last fight, who isn't the best fighter, I understand, but still a good fighter, rangy striker that's good on the feet. And, Hyun Yong Park was able to deal with him, get him down, beat him up, get a rear naked choke. He beat Eric Anders. I really love his performance against Tafon and Chukwi. Let's not forget Tafon and Chukwi's a guy who, although has had some losses in his career, he was beaten up Azamat Mirzakhanov in their fight for the early part of that fight and then got caught by a punch. The only recent loss of Hyun Yong Park's career has been to Gregory Rodriguez, and he was looking good in that fight. Like, he was starting to beat up Gregory Rodriguez and then got caught being a little bit overconfident, trying to go for a TKO finish and got counterpunched and put down and KO'd. But I do believe in Hyun Yong Park here. I believe he'll get this one done. Denis Tiuliulin's good, but I don't think he has any immediate finishing threat for Hyun Yong Park to worry about. He does have some finishes in his career, but I just don't see the striking in his realm. I don't see him having the striking to put away Hyun Yong Park, in my opinion. So I think Hyun Yong Park's going to be able to sort of take this into the later rounds and win a 29-28 close decision based on those last 2 rounds, mixing in some grappling. Tiuliulin's good at counter-grappling, but I think when people put a pace on him and start mixing in the grappling, he does start to slow down a bit. So I'll be going with Hyun Yong Park here by decision. We move on. Yeon Kim versus Mandy Bohm. I'm going to go Yeon Kim. Mandy Bohm's alright. I mean, I believed in her a little bit as a prospect, and I picked her in her debut, and she lost, and I'm just noticing a difference in the girls that these two are losing to. Yeong Kim's losing to Jocelyn Edwards, who's, you know, pretty good on the feet, rangy, technical, and just when I watch each of them fight, I'm just more impressed by Yeong Kim's form, stand-up ability. Mandy Bohm lost to Ariane Lipski and then lost to Victoria Leonardo, and Victoria Leonardo is not someone you really should be losing to, in my opinion. You know what I mean? Like, come on now. Not really someone you should be losing to. Whereas I can sort of understand, you know, a split decision to Jocelyn Edwards. She got robbed against Priscilla Capoeira, and Priscilla Capoeira is a dangerous female fighter, you know, probably lesbian, and dangerous in that regard. KO'd Ariane Lipski, who beat Mandy Bohm, you know what I mean? And Yeong Kim's taken these girls to decisions that she should have won, to split decisions, to very close decisions with Molly McCann, where McCann basically won that fight because she screamed at her at the end of the third round and sort of made it look like she was the leader of that fight and really put on the pressure at the end of the third. But yeah, I'm going to trust in Yeong Kim. Fought Alexa Grasso, Antonina Shevchenko. I just think she can get this one done. She's lost a lot of fights in a row. Both of these girls are on losing streaks, but Yeong Kim just massively impresses me more than Mandy Bohm does when we're watching her fight. So I'm going to move on to the Road to UFC fights. Now, I've done my research on this. I watched Road to UFC when it first began. I would recommend watching it, by the way, because there were some good fights on there, really good finishes as well. And let's make the picks. I'm going to go, we've got Hyun. Here we go. We've got Hyun Sung Park versus Sung Guk Choi. I'm going to be going with Park over Choi in this matchup. I think he's just a lot more talented of a prospect. In all honesty, he's a bigger guy for the division. He's more athletic as well. And there's just a difference in the way they made their opponents look. This guy looked like, you know, one of the guys that was going to be the face of Road to UFC. Someone that the UFC is really going to rally behind. You know, he's got some experience. He didn't have any real good wins over any solid opponents, but at Road to UFC, he put away his first guy by KO. He put away the second guy by rear naked choke in the first round, whereas Sung Guk Choi seemed to struggle with some opponents. And they were good opponents. They weren't bad. Like, they all fought some guys with decent records, but there was just a massive difference in the way they made their opponents look, and their opponents were of similar caliber. So I'm definitely going to be going with Hyun Sung Park is who I'm going to be going with here. I think his finishing ability is way higher than Choi, and I think that's going to be the difference maker in this fight. I think he can get this one done early in the first round. His last 6 fights have come by way of finish, and I think he's going to keep the momentum going. And yeah, 27 years of age, you know, longer reach, taller guy, more athletic. I'm definitely going to be going with Hyun Sung Park in this matchup. We move on to another fight on the card, which was Rinya Nakamura versus Toshiomi Kazama. I'm going with Rinya Nakamura in this matchup. He has some... I think he has an ability. Like, in all honesty, this matchup is a wrestler versus a guy with good jiu-jitsu, because you look at Toshiomi Kazama. He has really good Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and he's got good submission ability. He got KO'd before, and, you know, he's one of the guys on Road to UFC that kind of got sort of put through to the final stage by his opponent pulling out. So it's not even that he won both of his matchups, and he didn't even get a finish in the fight that he did have, and took it to a decision against a guy who, you know, had experience but wasn't like this surging up-and-coming prospect, more of a veteran on the scene that they gave him. And he did get the win. And he does have a lot of submissions in his career. And normally I'd think to myself, well, Nakamura's a wrestler, and he's taken on a guy here in Kazama who's got Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Maybe he's going to be taking him down and not liking it, and then end up getting submitted or maybe beaten on the feet. But the difference with Nakamura is he don't even like to wrestle, it seems, at times. You know what I mean? In his last fight on Road to UFC, on Road to UFC 6, to get into the final, he thought a 9-2 guy. And he just walked him down and beat him up badly and finished him. And it was a really good sign to see that from a guy who's, you know, got that wrestling foundation that he has, and he's competed in freestyle wrestling and stuff like that. And it was really good to see that from him. And I think that's what he's going to be able to do. So I think he's going to use the wrestling in this matchup, but as a takedown defense situation. So I think we're going to see Kazama panic shooting under the pressure of Nakamura, and Nakamura is going to be sprawling and then beating him up against a cage. So I think we're going to see a first round TKO from Nakamura, and I think he's just going to put the pressure on Kazama until he breaks. So end of the first round, I see Nakamura finishing Kazama against a cage. Kazama trying to pull guard, trying to shoot for takedowns, but Nakamura uses his wrestling ability defensively so he can beat up Kazama on the feet instead. We move on to another matchup, which is Zha Yi versus Jeong Yeong Lee. I'm going with Jeong Yeong Lee. Definitely going to be going with him. Zha Yi's a very experienced guy. Very, very experienced guy. He's got a lot of fights on his record. Not too many against great opponents, if we're being honest. Like, he's been very active in his career, and he's a guy who's fought every few months, and this reminds me a bit of the Rongju situation, a guy that we had from Asia in the UFC recently. He had a bunch of fights under the same promotion even, and he was just fighting every couple of months. But again, this guy, Jeong Yeong Lee, I don't know what it is about him. He just seems like a guy that they're really going to get behind. And he had really good wins on the road to UFC fights. You know? Finished a guy with an armbar, like, immediately into the fight, and then a KO immediately into a fight. And, you know, there's going to be nerves between the pair of them in the first round. Because they're getting into, this is their first fight in the UFC. They're going to have those jitters. Everyone's watching back home, and you know, this is going to be the big moment for them to make a statement and win road to UFC and finally get into the UFC and get to sign a contract and continue to fight in the UFC. And if it comes down to it, I trust this guy Lee to go out there and just batter Zha Yi in the first round. I really do. You know what I mean? Like, even on the road to UFC fight, he had a good win in his debut, but the second fight, you know, split decision, wasn't too impressive. But this Jeong Yeong Lee, he just seems like a really good athlete that's like really, really talented. And he's massive for featherweight, which I didn't realize till I watched back his fight again. But I remembered watching Road to UFC. I was thinking there was one guy who was just massive for his division and dangerous, really, really dangerous. And he was massive for his division. And I was wondering who it was. But then when I was watching back the fights for this, I was like, oh, it's that fucking athletic monster who could be on the source. 27 years of age, 73 inches of reach as well. He's going to have a big reach advantage here to use. He's just a specimen. And unless he's got a glass chin that I don't know about, because he hasn't been KO'd yet in his career, unless he's got a glass chin that I don't know about, he's massive for featherweight. 5'10", and it's not a Holloway 5'10". It's like a Makachev 5'10" at featherweight. Like, he's a massive guy, powerful, good reach. I think he's going to be a problem, and I think he'll take this guy out in the first round. So I'm going to call a first round finish for him. We move on to another fight on this card, which is Anshul Jubli versus Jeka Saragih. I'm going to be going with Jeka Saragih. I think I'm going to go with. That's how I'll pronounce his name. Anshul Jubli, a guy from India, which is good. We never really see fighters from India, so always a bit of hype when an Indian guy gets into the UFC, because you're looking for them to make a big splash and sort of open up that Indian market of MMA, which, you know, hasn't really got going yet. So maybe this guy could be the guy, but I don't think he's going to be the guy because he gets hit too often. And this guy, this guy Jeka, we'll call him Jeka because that surname's a weird thing to pronounce. Jeka, he's got this weird speed to him and danger to him. And he's upset the odds twice when he went on the road to UFC thing. He won his first fight by spinning back fist in the third round. But then when he went into the second fight, he landed a straight right hand. And it wasn't that just he landed a straight right hand. The guy he was fighting was massive for the division. I'll just say it, probably on the source. Specimen, athletic as hell, bunch of experience. And this right hand that he landed on him, this straight right hand, was so vicious. The speed on it. This guy doesn't look like he would have superhuman speed compared to some of the other guys that are on this card. He doesn't look like the physical specimen, but he's just got that twitch to his game. That fast twitch to his game. He's weirdly fast. And the straight right hand that he landed in his last Road to UFC fight was so vicious. Put the guy out cold. And that guy, I believe, was like a minus 300 favorite against him as well. Like, they really weren't counting on this guy winning on Road to UFC. And he looked like a guy, I don't know about you guys, but when I was watching him, he looked like a guy who finally figured it out. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes you see fighters that don't look good at one point in their career, and then all of a sudden it seems like everything's working for him. He seemed like that type of guy, so I'm definitely going to side with him here over Anshul Jubli, who is good and is a great kickboxer and is a really fun style, and he's got a good attitude as well. But in his last fight on Road to UFC, he just seemed a little bit too hittable. Way too hittable, in my opinion. Like, he was there to be hit. He was getting scrappy. He was laughing with his hands down. And the straight right hand that Jeka landed in his Road to UFC fight last. You ain't laughing putting your hands down, joking, eating shots back and forth. I think Anshul has a little bit of a habit of, you know, take one to give one, Muay Thai style. And Jeka's just, you can't take one to give one with him. So I'm going to go with him by KO over Jubli. We move on to another fight on the card, which is Yusaku Kinoshita versus Adam Fugitt. I'm going to be going with Kinoshita over Adam Fugitt. This isn't even on the Road to UFC. They're just sort of in the UFC. This is from the Contender Series. And, you know, Yusaku Kinoshita got an amazing KO in the third round. Very technical looking. Looked really good. It was sort of like a wonder that he was even on the Contender Series in the first place, dare I say. But, you know, he didn't lose to a schmuck. You know, he has a loss on his record and doesn't have the best of records. But it was to, you know, an illegal disqualification. He grabbed the cage a few times in that fight. And it was still a good opponent anyway. He was just cheating in the fight. So they had to sort of like make him lose because of it. Because he did it excessively in the fight. And you got a guy in Adam Fugitt who, you know, got KO'd by Michael Morales. Showed some toughness. Did show some toughness in that fight. But there was just like a composure that we saw with Kinoshita. Who arguably, I know he cheated, but should be like a 7-0 prospect right now. Where if you're coming off a KO loss against him, he just seems like he finds the right shot to put the button out. So I'm going to go with Kinoshita getting a KO here in the later rounds of this fight. Fugitt might be pushing the pace and taking him down a few times, but I think when both of them get sloppy and it goes into the second and third, I'm going to trust in the technique of Kinoshita to find that KO blow. We move on to another fight on the card. Doo Ho Choi versus Kyle Nelson. I'm going to go with Doo Ho Choi over Kyle Nelson. Kyle Nelson's he's actually kind of an underrated guy. But man, I believe in Doo Ho Choi. I think he did show a lot of skill. And if he can just sort of find it again, he can get it done. You know, Jai Herbert's not a world beater. And Nelson wasn't really able to win the grappling moment against him, you know. And Herbert has had a problem in his career with his takedown defense before, you know, even just, not going to say it, but being from the UK early in his career, you got to have some experience. And usually UK fighters, they get to the UFC and then they learn how to grapple on the go and they fix that part of their game. And Jai Herbert, pure striker, you know, went to a boring, dull grappling fight with Nelson. And Nelson didn't look good. He just didn't look committed and hungry in that fight, and he lost to Billy Quarantillo a long time before that by brutal KO. He hasn't been too active. He beat Paulo Reyes, but Paulo Reyes was one of those guys where it was like, why is he in the UFC? I know he's got a fun style, but come on. And then you look further into Nelson's career. You lost to Matt Sales. You know? Doo Ho Choi, he's lost some fights. But it's a scrap with Jourdain where he knocks Jourdain down a couple of times and then Jourdain catches him after Doo Ho Choi breaks his forearm in that fight, blocking a kick. And then Jeremy Stevens, you know, they go to war and Stevens finishes him in that fight. And then he goes to war with Cub Swanson. These aren't schmucks, especially at the time that he fought them, because, wow, that Cub Swanson fight was in 2016, 7 years ago. He's fought not many times since then. Okay. I guess he had to do his military service, which is done now, which is good. He's got that out of the way. Jeremy Stevens in 2018, Jourdain in 2019. Done his military service, recovered his forearm, recovered concussion-wise, got back into training, looking to get back into the UFC. I reckon we're going to see a good Doo Ho Choi in his prime get a good first round finish and make a statement on this card. We move on. Marcin Tybura versus Blagoi Ivanov. He's a great fighter. I'd love to fight him. Sorry. Marcin Tybura wins. Blagoi Ivanov, you know, he was like at one point like a good heavyweight, but it just seems like he's a tough fat man at this point. Like his last fight against Marcos Rodrigo de Lima, he arguably could have lost that, but he just held Marcos Rodrigo de Lima against a cage more than he got held against a cage. And, you know, he lost to Augusto Sakai, and he could have won that fight. I get it, but he still made it very close. Made it very, very close. Of course, he took those shots off Derrick Lewis, and he's a guy who you're not going to finish by KO. And guys who have that sort of mindset to go out there and win by KO are obviously going to have problems against him. You know, we even saw that with Tuivasa, who he got a win against, and Ben Rothwell, who's very aggressive. He got a win against him, and JDS had to go 5 rounds against him, and that was in Blagoi Ivanov's debut in the UFC, which was pretty ridiculous. And Derrick Lewis, split decision, arguably could have lost. But it seems like someone that you can outwork. And Tybura is good at outworking people. That's what we've seen so far in his career. And he almost did it to Volkov, but he lost that fight because Volkov got that takedown in round 1 and he didn't expect it. But he was able to outwork Romanov at altitude. You know what I mean? And that was a good sign. It could have been a draw, but if anyone won, it would have been Tybura, because the debate was on the first round being a 10-8 for Romanov or not. But even after being like destroyed in that first round, he came back and put the pace on people. Walt Harris got finished in the first round. He's really worked on that. Greg Hardy taken down, light work, finished. You know? Beat Ben Rothwell, beat Maxim Grishin, beat Sergei Spivak, who's also on this card, but a younger version of Spivak, of course. I'm going to go with Tybura. He pushes the pace tremendously well. Tremendously well. And I'm going to side with him winning this one. I think he just won't be held against a cage and let a fight slip away from him. So I'm going to go 29-28, 30-27. Marcin Tybura decision, picking at Blagoi Ivanov at range, and Romanov not doing enough damage to win himself the fight. We move on to another fight on this card, which is Daeun Jung versus Devin Clark. I'm siding with Daeun Jung. I think he's underrated. I know he got caught by Dustin Jacoby, but at the end of the day, he's still a 15-3. 29-year-old, like, heavyweight prospect. And I do believe in him. You know, he finished Nizuchukwu the way he did. And I know it was a weird KO, but he still got it done. He's a powerful dude. Beat William Knight and beat him convincingly as well, taking him down and winning the scrambles and just showing a good all-round game. Of course, he had that split decision to Sam Alvey, but so did Ryan Spann. So Alvey's just one of those weirdos that can somehow do that to people. Beat Kadis Ibragimov by finish. Beat Mike Rodriguez with that brutal setup KO in the first round. I trust in him to win this more than Devin Clark. And also with Devin Clark, he's taken so much damage in his career, man. I can see this being a KO for Daeun Jung. I can see him getting a TKO to ground and pound, like knees to the face against a cage. I see him getting a finish here. You know, I know that, you know, Devin Clark looked good against William Knight and got a 3rd round finish. But in the losses that he's taken, you know, he got easily beaten by Anthony Smith, got triangled, just ran himself straight into it and got shown levels pretty much of experience. Had a whatever fight against Manyfield where it was basically not even a fight whatsoever. Kutalaba really badly did damage to his face in that fight, made him have to get reconstructive jaw surgery. And then he got brutalized by Mirzakhanov in his last fight as well. And he's 32 and he's taken damage throughout his career. I can definitely see a longer, rangier Daeun Jung being able to find that kill switch on him and putting him out in this fight and finishing him. And then we start to see Daeun Jung make a bit more of a rise. Longer reach, tall guy, training at Korean top team. I think he's going to finish this fight by TKO in the 2nd round, I'll go with. And we move on to the main event. Derrick Lewis versus Sergei Spivak. He's a great fighter. I'd love to fight him. Both of them are on the card that I can do that impression for. For God's sake. A Derrick Lewis fight prediction. I don't know, man. I was thinking Sergei Spivak, but now I'm thinking Derrick Lewis. Because he's an underdog, and he's a good underdog. You know? He just seems like a really good underdog here if he's in shape and taking it seriously and knows that his back's against the wall. Spivak's very vulnerable on the feet. Very vulnerable on the feet, but he's such a good grappler. And he's massively improved his grappling. But Lewis just gets right back up. And, you know, if we want to compare the grappling skills of the pair of them, Derrick Lewis, like, Olenek was having good moments against Spivak in the grappling as well. So it's not even like I can say, well, you know, Olenek got Lewis down, because Olenek also got Spivak down. And it was a very close fight between Olenek and Spivak. And that's old man Olenek as well. For God's sakes, Derrick Lewis, are you really going to tempt me into picking you as an underdog here? God, man. Don't you just think this is one of them that he wins? I don't know. I just have a feeling about it. And I want to ignore that feeling and just say, oh no, Sergei Spivak's going to take him down, beat him up. But this just seems like one of them ones. Like, you can beat Curtis Blades and stuff his takedowns. You know? I almost feel like to beat Derrick Lewis, you've got to beat him up on the feet. And that's what a lot of people don't do. You know, Dorcas, of course, got beaten up by Derrick Lewis and finished. And he was a little bit too small to impose his game. And, you know, some grapplers have their moments, but Lewis always seems to get back up. Always seems to get back up and find his way back into the fight. Whereas when he fights people that actually can scrap with him, JDS, Cyril Gahn, Taito Ivasa, Sergei Pavlovich, those are the ones that he loses. And he took a bit of time off. He didn't rush back like he was originally going to in November. Spivak doesn't have KO power on the feet. His stand-up it leaves much to be desired. You know, and I know recently in his fights against Augusto Sakai, who's just a fat man, and Greg Hardy, he's looked good. But I'm almost thinking to myself, yes or no, the recent two opponents of Spivak's career have been worse than his original opponents. So although I see it as him improving his grappling and improving in general, I'm almost like, hang on a second. You know, Felipe Vandera, Olenek, Aspinall, and then you go to Greg Hardy, Sakai. No shit, you're making them look easier. You know, Sakai, Greg Hardy, Vandera aren't really good matchups for you. But when you take on Tybura, Walt Harris, even Tuivasa got back up a bunch of times against him. I know eventually got finished, but did get back up a bunch of times against him. Carlos Felipe, majority decision. And Felipe took that fight on short notice. So I'm going to go Derrick Lewis by KO. I'm just going to take it. This is what you take with Derrick Lewis. I'll take Derrick Lewis by KO. I think he'll find a KO blow on Sergei Spivak and put him out at some moment. He looks in shape, taking it seriously, back against a wall. One last KO win for Derrick Lewis. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Toodle pip. I'll see you later. Goodbye.